Hello, and in this video, you'll learn to create this awesome portfolio website using Next.js 14 and TypeScript. It has multiple pages, has animation on transition, has swipers, sliders. One of the best features are these cards, which flip on click to give you more information about the project. Also, we have this contact form. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Alright, so the first thing we can do is go to our desktop and create a new folder, which we'll call Next-website. Make sure to not use any capital letters. And let's drag and drop this into our Visual Studio Code and expand it. Next thing we can do is go to View and Terminal and paste in a command which we'll get from the official Next.js website and add a /. We are going to use TypeScript, so yes, 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 no, yes, and no. So basically clicking enter a bunch of times, and everything should get installed. When that's complete, we can run npm run dev to run the app in our local server. Now let's control click onto this link and see the Next.js template. Now we're going to remove all of this and start from scratch. So first of all, we can close this terminal and go to app and page.tsx, our main page. In here we can scroll down and remove everything inside of this return statement. And add a main, which will say home. Next, we can go to globals.css and remove all of the CSS except for these three lines. These three lines ensure that we can use Tailwind CSS in our app. Next thing we can do is go to layout.tsx, change this title, in my case to WebChain dev, and change the description to "This is my portfolio." Now we can have a look at how this looks in our app, and as you can see, a completely blank screen which says home, exactly what we need. Next thing we can do is open our terminal, stop it from running, and say npm install --save -dev and framer -motion swiper and react -icons. Now we can start working on the front page, but for this we'll need images. So you can go to the description down below and download all the necessary images. And now that we've moved all the images into the public folder, we can close it and go to page.tsx. In here we can say class name, w-screen, h-screen, and relative. In here we can remove this home and instead add a div. This div can have a class name of flex, items-center, w-full, h-full, bg-cover, and bg-center. Next we can say style, background, image, and say URL main-bg.web. Close this bracket and also add a / over here. Now let's see how this looks in the app. Don't forget to run your terminal. And as you can see, we have this awesome background. In here we can have another div. This div can have a class name of padding left of 20, on medium devices a padding left of 40, a padding bottom of 56, on medium devices a padding bottom of 20. Next, flex-call, gap-5, z-10, and finally max-w-750 pixels. In here we can have an h1, which can have a class name of text-50 pixels, text-white, and font-semi-bold. And this can say make anything possible with. Under here we can have a span. This span can have a quite interesting class name. This will be text-transparent, bg-clip-text, bg-gradient 2r, from-purple -500 to -cyan -500. And this can say web development. Under this h1 we can have a p tag, which will say some random text. And it will also have a class name of text-gray-200, hidden, and a medium devices and higher block. Under the p tag, we can have a div containing all the buttons. This will have a class name of flex-col, md flex-row hidden, and on medium devices flex. And this can have a link, which will come from next/link. This link will first of all have an href, in this case /my-skills, and a class name. This class name will be rounded-20 pixels, bg-blue-500, on hover, bg-blue-400, padding x of 5, padding y of 3, text-lg, text-white, and max-w-200 pixels. Next thing we can do is go in here and say learn more. Also, we can go inside of this div and make it a group. Next, let's copy this entire link and let's make a div inside of it. This will be a self-closing div. This self-closing div will have a class name of absolute rounded-20 pixels z-1 bg-white inset-0 opacity-0 group-hover. In that case, opacity will be 20. We can also change this text to my projects. And finally, let's copy this link one more time, add it in here, and say contact me. And we should be done with this part. Next thing we can do is go 3 divs under, so right next to the main, and copy the div we just made. We'll be making another very similar div for the mobile version. This div will first of all be absolute, bottom-10, z-20, right-5. Next, we can actually remove this medium flex, and we can remove this medium flex-row, and we can see on medium devices it's hidden. Also, these self-closing divs that we added are completely useless on the mobile version, so we can simply remove them. Right under this image, we can add another image, which will be the cliff. So we can say source /cliff.web. Next, you have an alt of cliff, a width of 480, and a height of 480. Under here, we can have another div. This div can have a class name of absolute, bottom-0, z-5, w-full, and h-full. Inside of it, we can have a Next.js image tag. This tag will first have a source of /trees.web, also an alt of trees, a width of 2000, and a height of 2000. We can make this auto instead of full, and in here add a class name of w-full and h-full. And finally, we can add the final image of our homepage. For this, we can copy this image tag, copy it over here, and say stars. Change this to stars, leave this at 300, and change these values. This will be top-10, left-0, and a z of 10. Next thing we can do is add a few minor fixes. First of all, over here we can say projects, and over here we can say contact-me. Also, I made a few errors over here. This should be hover and hover. And over here we can say gap-5. Next, we can go over here and also say gap-5 and say my-projects, and over here contact-me. Now we still have a few more errors with these buttons. Now if we look over here this seems normal, but as you can see it seems like we're always selecting this button over here, which is an issue. In a mobile version this also doesn't look correct. So to fix that we can simply add flex over here, which will fix the mobile part. So as you can see now they will be all in a column. And next we can go over here and add a relative to all of these divs. So relative, and once again relative. And this should be fixed. Now let's see. And yes, it does work perfectly. Also, we can go to this web development part. I'll add a space over here, and it will automatically give me this space. And as you can see, now everything looks good. Well, we can now move on to the navbar. By the way, if you ever have any issues with this bug fixing, you can always go into the description down below and check the source code from GitHub. To create the navbar, we can go into the root of our directory and create a new components folder. And in here, create a navbar.tsx and run refce. Next thing we can do is remove the starter text and style the wrapper div. This will be class name fixed top-0 z-40 w-full h-100 pixels bg-transparent flex justify-between items-center padding x-10 and on medium devices a padding x of 20. In here we can add another div which can say class name flex-row gap-3 and items-center. In here we can add the Next.js image tag. This tag will first of all have a source. Let's move this over here and add the source. It will be /course logo.jpg, an alt of logo, a width of 40, and a height of 40. This image will also have a class name of a w-full, h-full, object-contain, and rounded-full. Under here we can add an h1, which will say WebChain dev in my case. And it can have a class name of text-white, text-25 pixels, and font-semi-bold. And we can actually move this line up into this div and create a new div under it. This div can have a class name of flex-row gap-5 and margin bottom-2. This can say socials.map, social, make an instant return, and return a Next.js image tag. However, we haven't created these socials yet, so let's do that now. To do that, we can go into the root of our directory and create a new constants folder. And in here, create an index.ts and paste all this inside. This is simply a bunch of static data which we'll be using for the website. For example, somewhere over here we will have the socials. And there they are. You can find all of this in the description down below. So that we can go to navbar, select socials, and press Ctrl space to import it from constants. And in here, first of all, we can add a key, as this is a map. Then we can say social.name. Next, the source will be social.source. The alt will be social. Let's make this dynamic, and social.name. The width will be 20, or rather 28, and the height will also be 28. And now we are actually done with this navbar. We can now go to layout.tsx, go above the children, and add the navbar component. Now, if we look at the navbar itself, this image seems very oversized. So we can go back and add another div around this image. Let's copy this and paste it over here and say class name equals relative. And this should fix the entire issue. Once this error is gone, this logo is small and everything looks great. Now we can move on to the navigation. So we can now go into the components folder and create a new navigation.tsx and run refce. We can also straight away make this a client component as we'll be using hooks. So use client. Now we can go inside the component and say use state snippet and say is routing. And by default, it's going to equal to false. As always, if you can't use any of these snippets, you can go into extensions and download this extension. This is also where RAFC comes from. So now what we can do is also import use state from React. Next thing we can do is go under here and say const path equals use path name, which is going to come from next/navigation. This is simply going to give us the current path in the browser. Next we can say use state snippet, and this is going to equal is active. And by default it's going to equal path. Also we can say use state snippet, and this is going to be rev path. And by default it's going to equal to slash. Under here we can have a use effect, which will come from React, and open the dynamic block of code. We can say if rev path does not equal to path, in that case set is routing to true. And this is going to depend on path and prev path. Next we can actually change set prev path to the capital letter over here, and add another use effect over here. First of all, we will say if is routing, in that case, set prev path to path. Next we can say const timeout equals set timeout, and this will return set is routing to false, but this will only happen after 1200 milliseconds. And while still inside of the if block, we can return. So return, and this will be clear timeout of timeout. And this use effect will depend on is routing. Next, we can go into the return statement and remove this navigation text and style this div. First of all, it will say class name absolute. This will be quite long class name z-50 minus bottom dash 20. So don't forget the minus w-50%. On medium devices, w-20%. Max dash h dash 150 pixels. Rounded dash full. Flex justify dash between. Items dash center. Border and border dash white. Next thing we can do is move this class name down and over here add a normal CSS style, which will say left of 20%. And actually, now to think about it, we can actually remove this set is active use state. We don't really need it. Next, we can actually go into here and say nav links dot map. Say nav over here and make an instance return. This will return the Next.js image tag or the link tag. As this is a map, we can say key equals nav.name. href will equal to nav.link, and this will also have a class name of margin bottom dash 16, padding x, or rather padding left dash 4, min dash w dash 20%. Inside of here, we can say nav.icon, which will be a self-closing tag. We can give this a class name, and this will be a dynamic one. So we can say w-24 pixels, h-24 pixels. Also, open dynamic block, say path equals to nav.name. In that case, text dash purple dash 800. Otherwise, text dash white. And I believe we're for now done with this component. Now what we can do is go to layout.tsx, go under these children, and say navigation, which will come from components. And now let's see how this looks. We can go into our browser, reload the page, and something seems to be off, as you can see over here. Alright, so let's look at the problems one by one. First of all, we want this part to be partly under the page, but we don't want the page to be scrolled by it. So now we can go into global.css, right here say body, and say overflow hidden. Next, we can also go to navigation and add a padding Y of 7. So the icons aren't at the very top. And this part is fixed. And now let's see if the body part is also fixed. Sometimes you simply need to reload the entire page. So we can say Control C in the terminal, clear, and run it again. So sometimes these kind of things don't update automatically. It's a weird thing, but it does happen sometimes. Let's control click into it, and in a few seconds we should get the correct page. And yes, as you can see, it's no longer scrollable, and these icons are in the correct place. If we click, we will get redirected to another page, which we haven't created yet. So this is exactly what we're going to do, create all of the pages. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you. As many of you know, routing in Next.js works with a folder structure. So we can go to the app directory and create a new folder called my-skills and create a new page.tsx and run refc. Also, let's make this page capital. Now we can actually copy this and in app add another folder called my-projects. Also add a page.tsx and copy all of this in here. And once again, we can go to app, create a new folder, and create contact-me. Once again, page.tsx, and once again, paste all this in. You can change this to contact me. You can change this to my projects, and you can change this to my skills. And let's see if this works. Now let's look. If we click, this will redirect us to my skills, and as you can see, it's over here. Now, for some reason, I can't see the navigation, which is an issue. Oh yes, it is actually there, but we can't see it. For now, we will remove this later. We can go into navigation and say bg-black. Also, we can add a padding X of 4. Now it's going to be there. We can click over here, my projects, contact me, and the homepage. Everything is correct. Now we can go ahead and create the transition for the routing. For this, we can go to components and create a new file called transition.tsx and run refc. In here, we can make this client component as we'll be using motion, so use client. And under here, import the motion itself. So import motion from framer motion. Next, under here, but still outside of the component, we can create the transition variance. First of all, we'll have an initial position. So initial is going to be a Y of 100% and a height. So height of 100%. Next, under here, we can have an animate of, we can actually copy this, paste it in here, and change this to 0%. And finally, we can have an exit. This exit will be a Y of an array of 0% and 100%. Next, a height of the same thing, 0% and 100%. Now we can go inside the transition component, remove this text, and create motion.div. We can now style this div. This will be a class name of fixed, right-0, h-screen, w-screen, bottom-full, z-30, and a bg of hash 2e2257. Next, we can expand this by moving this down and moving this down, and over here adding some variance, which will be transition variance. Next, we can have an initial of initial, an exit of exit, and finally an animate of, you guessed it, animate. And finally, we can have a transition. This will be delay of 0.2, a duration of 0.6, and finally an ease of ease in out, and remove this in. We can actually make this a self-closing div, as we won't have anything inside of it, and let's copy it 2 more times. Now we can change the delays to 0.4 over here and 0.6 over here. Next, we can change the z-index to 20 and 20, and also change the background colors. Over here, it'll be 3B, 2D, 71, and over here, 4B, 3792. Now we can go into the navigation. Above this nav links, we can say is routing. In that case, we will have the transition, which will come from /transition. And now let's see how this looks. And this looks great. By the way, I made a small error, but you don't really have to fix it. So if we go over here and change the Z to 10, we'll have 3 instead of 2. Like this. Both look great. It's really your choice which one you would choose. And by the way, the navigation might lag on your local device, so it might not show up in time. This is completely normal, as Next.js is a server-side rendered framework, and on your local device, this will cause lag. However, once we deploy it to Vercel, there will be practically no lag. Also, before we move on to the My Skills page, let's make this text match with the color of the horse, and let's make these transparent. So we can go back and change this from cyan to red. Next, we can actually remove this and say bg-transparent. And do the same thing over here as well, and over here. Also, let's remove this hover, as it's a mobile version and you physically can't hover on mobile. Also, we can say border dash white, and copy this 3 more times. So 1, and we'll remove this, 2, and 3. Border, and once again over here, border. Let's see how this looks. Let's reload the page. And this does look much better, especially the text. For some reason, we still can't see the border around here. So let's see what the issue is. It seems it simply wasn't updating correctly, and now we have the entire front page, and this looks amazing. Now, let's move on to the My Skills section. So to do that, we can go into my-skills, page.tsx, and start working. First of all, we're going to make this a client component, as we'll be using Swiper. Next, let's make all the imports. First of all, import Swiper and Swiper slide from Swiper/React. Next, import Swiper/CSS. Next, import skill data from constants. Next, import image from next image. And finally, import autoplay from Swiper/modules. And something's wrong here, and we simply need to make this not capital. Next, we can go into the component itself, remove this text, and style the div. We'll have a class name of h-screen, w-screen, items-center, justify-center, bg-cover, and bg-center. Next, we can also say, we'll move this down and say style to add the background image. So we can say background image URL /bg-2.jpg. In here, we can create another div, which can have a class name of flex-call gap-20 max-w-80%, text-center, and items-center. In here, we can create another div, which will house all the text. We can say class name flex-call items dash center, and gap dash 4. In here, we can first of all have an h1, which will say skills. This will have a class name of font dash semi bold, text dash white, and text dash 50 pixels. In here, we'll actually have a very similar div as in the page.tsx or other span. So we can go up here, copy this span, go over here, paste it in here, and change this to and. And actually, we don't really have to remove this space that we have over here. Copy this space, paste it under here as well, and in here say technologies. And actually, to improve this, another place we can add this span is the navbar. So we can actually make this position better, copy the span, go to the navbar, and add the span over here. And remove this dev, and add the dev over here. Like this. So back over here, we can go into the h1, add a p tag, and say, using the latest technologies or other tech, this world has to offer. And add a class name to this p tag. So simply be text dash gray dash 300 and text dash 20 pixels. Now we can go under this p tag and under this div and add a swiper. This swiper will have a lot of attributes. First of all, slides per view, and this will be 5. Next, loop equals true, so it never ends. Next, we can say autoplay, and this will have some attributes of its own, so equals delay of 0, so maximum speed, and disable on interaction is false. Under here, we can say speed 5000, modules equals autoplay, and finally a class name of max-w-80%. And here we can say skill data.map skill and make an instant return of a swiper slide, which in this case will have a key, not whatever I just did, a key of index, which we'll need to add over here. Inside of here, we can have an image, which will have some attributes as always. So first of all, a source of skill.image. Next, an alt of skill.name, a width of skill.width, a height of skill.height, and that is all. So to make the second swiper, we can copy this one, as the second one will be practically identical, paste it in here, go into autoplay, and here say reverse direction, and set it to true. And we should actually be done. Let's go over here, I'll go into my skills, and as you can see, here we have this page with 2 swipers going in 2 separate directions. And now we're fully done with this page, and now let's move on to the My Projects page. So we can begin to create this page by going to My Projects and page.tsx, removing this text, and styling the div. This will have a class name of w-screen, h-screen, flex items-center, justify-center, bg-center, bg-cover. So we can now move this down and add the background image. So we can say style, background image, URL, just as we've done before multiple times, mountains.jpg, and close the browser. And here we can create another div, which will have a class name of grid, grid-cols-2, gap-5, max-w-90%, and max-h-90%. This will house all of the project cards. We can now create the project card component by going to the components folder, creating a new file called the project card.tsx, and running refc. We can make this a client component as we'll be using motion, so use client and import motion by saying import motion from framer motion. This component will be reusable, so it will have props. We can go in here and say image, title, and text. And this will all be of a type of props. Now we can define the props interface. So we can say interface, props, and define all the types. So image of a type string, title of a type string, and finally text also of a type string. Next thing we can do is go inside of this component and say use state snippet and say is flipped. By default, it's going to equal to false. Next, we can make this a capital letter and make another use state. The use state snippet is animating, and by default, it's going to also equal to false. Make this capital and select this, press Ctrl space, and import use state from React. Next, we can change this to an I made a mistake, and under here, create a new function. The function handle flip, and in here, add an if statement. So if not is animating, in that case, set is flipped. Not is flipped, and set is animating to true. Now we can make the card itself. We can remove this text and give this div a class name. This is going to be W-450 pixels, H-280 pixels, rounded-MD, and cursor-pointer. We can also move this down and say on click, handle flip. In here we can create a motion.div. This motion div will have a lot of attributes. First of all, as always, a class name, which is going to be flip-card-inner, a custom class, W-full, and H-full. Under here we can say initial equals false, next animate equals rotate Y, and in the case of is flipped, it's going to be 180, otherwise 360. Next, a transition, which is going to have a duration of 0.6 and an animation direction of normal. And finally, we can say on animation complete, a callback function of set is animating to false. Now we can add all the custom classes. For this, you can go to globals.css and paste this, which you'll find in the description down below. In here, we can create another div, which will have a class name of W-full, H-full, flip-card-front, bg-cover, bg-center, text-weight, rounded-lg, and a padding of 4. This div is going to have a background image, so in here we can say style, background image, but in this case it's going to be a template string of URL and image, which will come from props. In here we can have a self-closing div. This div will have a class name of absolute inset-0 W-full H-full rounded-MD bg-black opacity-0 group-hover and opacity-40, and we can also make this a group and a relative. Next, under here we can have another div, which is not going to be self-closing, and it will have a class name of also absolute inset-0 W-full H-full text-20 pixels, padding bottom of 10, hidden group-hover, flex, items-center, z-20, and justify-center. This will say learn more and NGT, which is a special HTML character. Next, we can work on the back side of the card. Let's copy this, paste this here, change this to back. Actually remove this and make this opacity -50 and remove all of this. Next in here we can have a div. This div is going to say class name flex-call and gap -20. Also padding y of 3 and a z of 30. Also I forgot this should say z-1. This first of all is going to have an h1 which will say the title. And it's going to have a class name. This class name is going to be text-weight text-2xl font-semi-bold. Under here we can have a p tag which will say text, and it's going to have a class name of text-gray-200 text-20 pixels. Now if there aren't any errors, we can now go back to the project page and map all of these components out. So we can say projects, which come from components, or rather constants, .map, project, and index, and make an instance return. This will return the project card, and it's going to have some attributes. So we can say key is going to be index, a title of project.title, a text of project.text, and finally an image of project.image. Or rather source, I believe. Now let's see how this looks in the actual app. So we can go to the projects page, and here it is, these 4 cards. And when we click on them, we get a description of this particular card. By the way, all these are real projects that you can find in the description down below and on my YouTube channel. Now we can create the final page of our application. For this we can go into Contact Me, remove this text, and style the wrapper div. Here we can say class name, w-screen, h-screen, bg-cover, bg-center, flex, items-center, justify-center. We can now add the background image by going over here and saying style, background, image, URL, bg-3.jpg. And here we can have another div, which will have a class name. This will be h-60%, w-80%, relative, bg-cover, bg-center, rounded-xl, border, and border-white. This div will also have a background image, so style, background, image, URL, atom, bg-comp.web. And in here we can have yet another div. This can have a class name of absolute, left-20, bottom-16, w-70%, on medium devices w-30%. And in here we'll have the contact form component. So for this we can go into components, create a new file called contact form.tsx, and run refce. Now we can actually make this div a form and remove this text. In here we can have an h2 which will say contact me. We can style it by saying class name text-2xl font-bold margin bottom-5 and text-weight. Under here we can have a div which will have a class name of margin bottom-3, and this div will have an input which will be a cell closing tag. This input will first of all have a type of text, a placeholder of your name, a name of name, a class name of w-full, padding x-3, padding y-2, text-sm, text-gray-200, placeholder -gray-400, bg-white, border -0, rounded, and shadow. And now we can copy this div, add it 2 more times, and here say email. The placeholder is going to be email, and the name is going to be email. Next, in here we can say the type is also going to be text. We can remove this. The placeholder is going to be your message. And the name is going to be message. And in here we can add a button which will say send a message. We can now style this button by saying class name, adding x-6, adding y-3, text-sm, font-bold, text-white, uppercase, transition-all, duration -150, ease-linear, linear like this, bg-blue-500, and on hover, bg-blue-400. Now we can go back into contact me, go inside of this div, and place the contact form. And now let's look at the finished application. But just before doing that, let's add a margin bottom -5 over here. And now we should truly be done. So, here we have our finished website. We have this awesome navbar, video and image background, navigation buttons, and unique navigation tab. Also, when we navigate, we have this navigation animation. We have these skills and technology sliders. We also have the project page with cards that flip around on click. And we finally have this contact page with a contact form. Well, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you.